So there are very sketchy details in public domain as of now. What's the condition of Arshdeep Singh alias Arsh Dalla? The information in public domain, it seems to indicate that there was an individual who came to hospital. One was treated for gunshot injuries and then discharged. The police were called and two individuals were subsequently taken into custody. The Halton Regional Police Service on the 9th of November took them in custody. The question remains, has Canada been forced to act against the Khalistan Tiger Force chief and the successor of Hardeep Singh Nijjar because of this shooting? Joining me on India First is Terry Milvsky. He's a senior Canadian journalist. He's author of Blood for Blood, 50 Years of the Global Khalistan Project. Also with me is Professor Brahma Chilani, former advisor to the National Security Council in India and a very well-respected strategic affairs analyst. And Professor Chilani, how do you view these recent actions against Khalistani elements in Canada? Action allegedly on Arsh Dalla and on Inderjeet Ghoshal, for that Brampton Hindu temple attack.
I think the temple attacks in Brampton, Ontario and Surrey, British Columbia, the initial arrests were of Hindu devotees, not of the Khalistanis who staged the demonstrations and carried out the attacks on the Hindu devotees. So the question is, why did they belatedly make some arrests of the Khalistanis? It's a difficult question to answer. The fact is that Canada, under Trudeau, has become even more enmeshed in Khalistan militancy. It was the scourge of Khalistan militancy in Canada that led to the deadly bombing of Air India Flight 182. And the problem has not eased, but gotten worse over the years because Canada has refused to clean up its act. I don't think Canada under Trudeau is willing to clean up its act. So I think whatever is happening now is no indication of Canada's seriousness to deal with its problem, because this problem one day will haunt Canada's own security.
There is no doubt about that. But Terry Milvsky, what can you tell us about the arrest of Arshdeep Singh Dalla? The Halton police statement is rather sketchy.
It is too sketchy, really, to draw too many conclusions, except this one, that if it is indeed a step towards the Indian position that some of these people on the long list of wanted men should be arrested and perhaps deported and returned to India. If that is what it signifies, then that's a positive step. But we can't say that yet because, as has already been pointed out, Canada's record on this is not very good. We have for 40 years in Canada put up with, pandered to and indulged Khalistani militants and looked the other way at their glorification of violence and terrorism, to include the continuing glorification even of Canada's worst ever mass murderer, Talvinder Parmar, the mastermind of the Kanishka bombing of 1985, already referred to. So, as I see it now, what we have is an arrest where Canada is not conceding that this guy was a wanted terrorist. Canada's not saying we're acting in response to Indian pressure, we're giving India what it wants by arresting this guy. No, they're confining themselves, the police so far anyway, they're confining themselves to saying this guy is a suspect in a local shooting incident. Ordinary criminal activity, in other words, ordinary for him perhaps, ordinary criminal activity, not terrorism. Now, we shall see. I think that the action, the arrest in the Temple demonstration could also be seen, but we don't have enough facts yet, could also be seen as a step towards India, a way to open the doors to further negotiations on who exactly qualifies to be extradited, if that's what India wants in some cases. It could be such a step. I mean, at the very least, we can agree, I think, that it was embarrassing for Canada to see the pictures that everybody in India saw of a uniformed Canadian policeman, a sergeant no less, taking part in a Khalistani demonstration, taking sides, obviously taking sides. And of course, he was suspended. Well, perhaps these two actions against Arsh Dalla and Sergeant Sohi, perhaps they may be very good signs that Canada is beginning to clean up its act, as you put it, or act on its own, as the government would put it. They don't want it. They won't admit. We're not going to be able to prove they did it because the Indians made them. We're not going to have that. But I think at the moment we're free to speculate on that.
Sure. But because we've repeatedly seen this, as you very rightly pointed out, you pointed out to Sergeant Sohi of the Peel police. Imagine a police sergeant being a Khalistani protester there. But that's not the only case, Professor Chilani. You'd recall Sandeep Singh works for the customs or immigration services in Canada and is a declared terrorist in India. That would just show how deeply entrenched Khalistanis are in the Canadian system, and India has repeatedly asked the Canadian government to take action not just against Arshdeep Singh Dalla but several other terrorists. Now, in your appreciation, because you and I both know, and India has made that public, Captain Amrinder Singh, when he was Chief Minister of Punjab, he'd handed over Trudeau a list of terrorists and no action was taken, and suddenly we see some kind of action.
Gaurav, you're right. These cases that we have seen where Sergeant Sodi participating in a Khalistan demonstration, then there's a video of two Sikh Surrey policemen, Surrey in British Columbia, policemen in a sword contest with Khalistan flags among the people around them. All these things raise the question about how Canada recruits its law enforcement officers. But there's a larger issue. The larger issue is, and I think it's time for the Indian government to spotlight that tragic bombing of Air India Flight 182, because that bombing remains at the root of the Canada-India spat, because the wounds from that bombing have not healed in India. And worse is that the Canadian spy agency, CSIS, which is known in Canada as CSIS, probably had some connection with that bombing. It had a mole. For example, it had a mole in the Khalistan terrorist cell in Canada that was involved in the bombing. CSIS knew of the plan to bomb Air India Flight 182, but took no action to stop the terrorist attack. Instead, just days before the deadly bombing, CSIS asked its mole to pull out so that he wouldn't be implicated. And then, when the Canadian Royal Mounted Police was investigating the bombing, it was seeking to collect evidence against the suspects. At the same time, CSIS was destroying taped telephone calls between the same suspects that RCMP was investigating. I think CSIS' role, even more recently, for example, its cultivating of Niger, the fact that CSIS officers were meeting with Niger once or twice every week, and it was happening for months, seemed to suggest that they were treating Niger as an intelligence asset. These issues need to be highlighted, and I think the government of India would do well to spotlight the issues that still arise from Air India Flight 182 bombing.
The points that you've raised, our High Commissioner to Canada, in an interview to various journalists, and Terry Milsky, since you've written a book on 50 years of that Khalistan project, you can also tell us, are these Khalistanis a part of Canadian deep state project? What is this Khalistani project that the deep state in the West seem to be running, and why?
I don't think they are connected with the deep state. I don't think it's that systematic. I don't think Canada has an organized deep state that is capable of playing these kind of deep games on the international stage. Look at what's happened in the recent case where Trudeau got up and made this fine speech about the illegal activities, pointing the finger at the Narendra Modi government as being responsible for a killing on Canadian soil of a Canadian citizen. Whereas, compare that with the American approach, far more discreet, far more polite, I would argue more sophisticated, where they didn't point the finger at the Modi government. They pointed the finger at an employee of the government, leaving wiggle room for the government of India to say, for later down the line perhaps, that, well, it was a rogue operation. We weren't involved in this.
Unless somebody was playing the good cop, bad cop in the Biden administration. But be that as it may, because that is total speculation. I want to come to the 2 points that Professor Brahmachelani raised, that CSIS officials had a mole inside before the AI bombing, and you've written a book on the Kanishk bombing. You've investigated that case well, and CSIS was involved, the Canadian intelligence agencies were involved in destruction of evidence.
Well, on both of those points, you're quoting me.
Yes.
I did a lot of work on this file, and I'll make a couple of very quick points. I'll try not to go on too long. As for the issue of the destruction of the wiretaps, this appears to have been stupidity to me. I was looking for a conspiracy to cover up valuable evidence, and there was such a conspiracy, in my view, not to cover up the crime, but to cover up the incompetence. The agency was new. The CSIS agency, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, was brand new, didn't know what they were doing. They screwed up in many other ways as well. And I think that somebody knew that these tapes would show that they should have known. But you can't say they knew what was on the tapes and then erased them, because they didn't have a translator lined up. I mean, things are as stupid and simple as that. They didn't have a translator who was security cleared to deal with all the backlog of tapes. Then when they hadn't even listened to the tapes, they realized that if it turned out that if that got out, they would look incredibly stupid, so they trashed them. So I can say much the same about the theory that CSIS pulled a mole out. I believe much of that is true, and I know who the mole allegedly was, and we all do, and I think that there's no solid evidence that they knew specifically that this flight...
India's specific intelligence inputs, India seeking additional baggage handlers, India seeking baggage scrutiny based on those intelligence inputs. Again. I mean, it's a case of how complicit Pierre Trudeau's dad and his administration were, Pierre Trudeau and his administration. But be that as it may, Professor Chelani, Hindus in Canada now appear to be standing up to be counted. Does that have Justin Trudeau worried, or would you look at this as perhaps American pressure, since there's a new dispensation in the United States of America? Is Trudeau turning into a new leaf, or is this furious backpedaling the way you look at this sudden change?
Gaurav, these are two separate issues. The first is the communal tensions between Hindus and Sikhs in Canada. That's very unfortunate because, as Trudeau himself has acknowledged, the vast majority of Sikhs in Canada are not Khalistan supporters.
Yes.
So there shouldn't be tensions between Sikhs and Hindus. They've always lived in harmony wherever they coexist, including in India, including in India's Punjab, for example. There is no communal tension between Hindus and Sikhs in India's Punjab. And then this other issue about Trump and Justin Trudeau. Trump in the past has called Trudeau very dishonest and far left lunatic. And Trump's return to the White House is bad news for Trudeau at a time when Trudeau's political fortunes are already falling. If Trump implements his plan for a 10% tariff on all imports, including from Canada, that could push Canada's sputtering economy into recession and triggering the collapse of Trudeau's political fortunes. The fact is that when Trump was in the White House earlier, in his first term, he threatened to renegotiate NAFTA. He was considering a 25% tariff on the auto sector. That would have, been a severe blow on the Canadian economy. And the fact is that Canada is highly trade dependent on the US. 75% of Canada's exports go to the US. And whatever Trump does, and Trump is going to be quite ambitious this time, Trump's economic plans are going to impact Canada because Canada's economy has been slowing very dramatically, and whatever Trump does.
Jagmeet Singh was in panic.
Yes, you're right.
And I want to bring in Terry Milsky on this since I just have about a minute and a half to go. Terry, we saw those images of Jagmeet Singh when Donald Trump won elections. Through the campaign and in the run-up to the campaign in Canada, so you're just, not just Justin Trudeau, but a number of leaders in Canada who were abusing Pierre Poilievre, comparing him to Donald Trump, and Trump himself, as Professor Chilani pointed out, he's called Trudeau a far left lunatic who's two-faced. How do you see this relationship pan out now?
Well, it doesn't sound very good, does it? Professor Chilani is absolutely correct. It was 2022, actually, when Trump called Trudeau a left-wing lunatic. He also said that he was probably the son of Fidel Castro, not Pierre Trudeau. So they're not starting out on a very good footing, are they? Very briefly, I know you're short of time. The official word in Ottawa, where I am, from the government, is that don't worry, the new Trump administration is going to be no problem. Canada will be, in the words of the Deputy Prime Minister, Chrystia Freeland, absolutely fine. Translated from the original Pollyanna, that means that there's a blind screaming panic on in Ottawa, and quite rightly, because the last time around, of course, Trump did indeed slap tariffs on Canadian aluminum, Canadian steel, called Trudeau names, and criticized Canada, rightly in my view, for its slowness on defense spending and much else besides. So it looks bad, and as bad as it looks, I suspect it may be worse, despite what the government tells you, that don't worry, we've been through this before, we can handle Trump. Oh yeah? Well, I'd like to see that.
We'd all like to see that. We'd all actually like to see what Trudeau does with terror. But it's great having the two of you on this special broadcast. It'll be wonderful having you back in the days and weeks ahead for joining me here on this India Today special. Many thanks.